So here's your design and you asked if you screwed it up. Well, no, not really. There's certain things that need to be fixed in it, but other than that, it's not really, we can make that work. So what I usually do when I start looking at somebody else's design, the first thing I usually do is look where's the origin. The origin is an important point of reference when you start needing to debugging a design, and in this case, it's not really aligned with much. So that's probably the first thing that we are going to fix. So then the next thing is there is a sketch folder at the top level, and in this sort of a mechanical design, you want to make sure that all your sketches that belong to the components are in those components, and that's not the case in this case. So the sketch for this that looks like the flywheel or the trolley wheel is located here, and it's in the viewport it's here, meaning it's also dislocated from the geometry of the actual wheel, and then the sketch itself here in the browser is located here at the top level. So that's another thing that we'll need to fix, because obviously this is the wheel component and there's no sketch in it. And then I usually take a look at the structure of the assemblies, and I also take a look at the origins here. I can see that also doesn't look awfully great. Let me take a look at some of the sketches here. Well, I can see that the sketch wasn't located at the origin point when the part was created. That's not great. One should always reference the origin when making a sketch. The origin is such an important reference point. And the other thing that I see in here is that this side plate component has a body in here, and then at the same level with that body it has another component, and that's actually an identical copy of that body. So the intention was probably to create an identical copy of a component and not of a body. So we need to fix that as well. But let's start from the beginning. I usually roll the timeline back all the way and just see how this evolves. So you create a component, there's a sketch, and as I already said, this sketch, that's another thing that I'm usually taking a look at. Let me roll the timeline back, forward, come on. When I design something myself, I usually, early on before I start designing, take a look at symmetries, and obviously there's a good bit of symmetry here in this design. It seems to be the design is symmetric about this half. At least this side plate here, that keeper plate, and that adjustment plate down here, they're all kind of mirror symmetric to those parts here. But those parts are also symmetric down this line. Okay, with that in mind, let's roll the timeline all the way back and start from scratch. So there's this sketch, and as I said, symmetry is important. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to move this sketch so that it's centered at the origin point. So there's a constraint here. If I hold my finger on the mouse button, I can pick which constraint. There are two constraints in the same location. One is for this line that's blue highlighted now, and one for the other. I pick the first one and hit the delete button and delete it, and then I'm going to do the same with the second one. And now I should be able to drag this rectangle around. So the way I constrain this now to the origin point, I'm going to take a horizontal vertical constraint, pick the origin point, hold the shift key, and while I mouse over this line here, it highlights the center point of that line. So when I click it, it then constrains it. I'm going to do the same thing with that vertical line. There it is. And now it's fully constrained, and that's visible when these lines in that in the visual style and the environment that I'm using, which is the gray room. Unfortunately, that kind of vanishes here of the screencast. It's the gray room. When you use the gray room, and I think there's another environment, when you use that, when the lines turn white, that means they're fully constrained. Okay, we can stop this sketch and continue with our analysis. All right, that looks all okay. That looks like the first component. And you create a second component, that's the side plate. Let's collapse this and see what we do there. Aha! So I can see what you did here. There's the origin point. You wanted to probably create a sketch there, and because that component is in the way, you just move it out of the way and then store the location. That's not a good idea. So we just delete this. If you don't want to see that component, just hide it. Another way to hide everything else but the component you work on is just right-click on that component, hit isolate, and then you only see that component. There's not much there at the moment. Now there is, but then you can also unisolate. All right, but let's isolate this. And that sketch also was not created at the origin or referenced to the origin. So let's roll this one step back and edit the sketch. And let's see what we have here. Okay, I can drag this around by this line. And it looks like I can just simply create a coincident constraint between this point and origin. Great. Everything turned white. Now this is fully constrained. And there is our side plate. Threads. And here it starts. That is a copy-paste body operation. So you create that second body, and what you want to do is actually not copy that body. There's a use for that, but that's not this case. And then you move it out of place, and then you put it here into another component that's in that same component. Not a good idea, so we're going to delete this. That's really not needed. All right, so that concludes the side plate. And if we unisolate it, now we have both components in the same spot, and that's okay. So now you start designing that adjusting shim, and there again you move this out of place, not necessary. We'll delete that operation. And there's a sketch somewhere in the adjusting plate. Let's see. All right. Okay, I see what happened. That sketch isn't also fully constrained, meaning I can actually pull these around without editing the sketch. You might have snapped those to those holes when you created the sketch. The rectangle here that forms the sketch is actually constrained because it was projected of this body. And when I moved the sketch that created this body, and then created the volume of that actual body here, that sketch was projected in the correct place. It's just these circles here weren't. But that is easily fixed. So let's hide that, edit the sketch. And I need this back. What I'm going to do, I'm going to simply project these holes into that sketch. And then I'm just simply going to drag these circles and snap those to the center point of those projected circles. And there you see there's a coincident constraint, and those circles are fully constrained and will remain in place. So and there we have our adjusting ship. And there you create a second component with another adjusting shim in it, and that's actually also not needed. So I'm just going to delete it. All right, not needed. So the next thing you're designing is the keeper plate. I think that's the thing that's set on here on one of those sides. So let's see how that looks like. There is a sketch. There it is. And just like the adjustment shim, that keeper plate is also designed in place right here on the side plate, which is great. Oh, I forgot something. Something very important. We are creating an assembly, and in any assembly, at least one component has to be grounded. Because if you don't ground them, you can just drag them around in the viewport and lose their location. And we don't really want this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to roll the timeline all the way back. And you can ground a component as early as it's created. Even if there's nothing in it, you can ground a component. So let's go ahead and do that. So because later on when we created this sketch, we centered it on the origin point. Now when we create that component and move everything back in place here, that component is grounded. Now we can grab it like we want to, but we can't move it. But the adjusting shim was designed in place. And because it was designed in place, as soon as we have it there completed, we're just going to simply use an as-built joint or an as-built rigid joint. And there this plate is fixed in space. Okay, so there's our keeper plate. We weren't quite done with this. Design in place, and there it is. And there you do another thing that you shouldn't be doing. Because of your design style, you need that offset here from the adjustment plate. And you move these parts away. And you actually don't move the component, you use the body. You move the body away from the sketch in the component. Then you do the same with the keeper plate. We don't need that. We delete these operations as well. All right, so the keeper plate is right there in the location that it needs to be on the side plate. So here also we're going to use an as-built joint. Okay. All right. So now that we have the side plate and the keeper plate assembled, and the two other, this adjusting shim assembled to the crosshead, we should go ahead and assemble the side plate here to the adjusting plate, and we're just going to simply use one of the joints here. So I'm hovering here over the surface. If I hit the command key or the control key on Windows, I can constrain it here to the surface, and actually it will always go to one of those snap points. We're going to use this here. No, I don't need a pin slot. I'm going to use a rigid joint. It's certainly not on that face, but we're to place it right here. Okay. So now I have those three components, and I would like to actually create copies, identical copies of those on the other side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another component, and I'm going to call that side plate assembly. And when I created the component was automatically activated, but I don't want this at the moment. I'm going to activate the top level, and I want to move those 3 components into that side plate assembly. The only way I can do this is by moving the timeline all the way forward to the end. And there they are moved into that assembly. And this has to be done at the end of the timeline, obviously. And if you move the timeline back, they're here in the structure again. And if you move it forward again, they're back in the side plate assembly. What I'm going to do now, I'm simply going to copy and paste that side plate assembly and then join it to the other side. There are several ways to do that. You can actually just right-click it and copy, and then, paste. Or you could actually hold the Command or Control key and drag that side plate assembly onto the top assembly. And there it is. And there's too much. Let me undo this. I think if we go here into the keeper plate, yep, same thing. You designed a component in the component, you copied a body, etc., etc. We don't need this. So let's go back to the keeper plate and undo that. Those operations are there, not needed. So there's the keeper plate. They create that mirror. Yes, that stuff is also not needed. You don't need to mirror a component in this case. That's not a good idea. Alright, I move this all the way forward, and there's my side plate assembly. And I'm going to take it, hold the Command key, click it, and move it up here. And one thing that is good to know is it asks you now to move it into location. So the first move after a copy-paste operation, or in a copy-paste operation, or when you insert external components, linked components, the first move is free. It will not be recorded in the timeline. And that's great. So my recommendation is to move it to a point where you have easy access to the geometry that you use for joining. So I'm going to move it here, and I'm going to create a joint just like I did before. All right, joined. So there's one more thing that is bugging me, and that is this wheel, and the fact that the sketch for this wheel is not in the wheel. So one thing I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to inspect this radius. That doesn't tell me much. .625 inches. Okay, hopefully I can remember this. And now we're going to fix that thing. So there's the side plate assembly. Where's the trolley wheel? That sketch is showing, but there seems to be nothing in it, so I'm just going to delete it. And there is the sketch for the trolley wheel. And obviously it's here. And it's not created in that component. So let's see, what else do we have there. There's the trolley wheel component. There's the revolve. There's another sketch, also created here at the top level. So what you forgot to do is when you create that trolley wheel, you didn't activate that component. And when you then created the sketches that we created at the top level, and then you revolved, and the revolve actually happened in the component. So what we need to be doing is we will delete that. We will delete the revolve feature, and we get a complaint because that sketch was sketched on a face of that trolley wheel, and now it lost its reference plane. And if you look at the warning, that's probably what it's going to tell you. Review warning. Yeah, sketch plane is lost. We'll fix that later. So now we have a trolley wheel, and we should be able to take these two sketches and just pull them into that trolley wheel. And that only works with one of the sketches. So let me look at that sketch and wonder why that doesn't work. I think I know why it doesn't work. If you look at this sketch, this is just a normal sketch with, lines, arcs, etc. that were designed in that sketch and created. But this here is, this dark purple indicates it's a projected line. And that projected line creates a reference to another body, probably one of the side plates here. And as soon as a sketch has a reference, you can't just move it into another component. So what we're going to do, just simply going to delete that reference. And then we can move it into the trolley wheel, hopefully. Yes, we can. There it is. Great. So now we can just look at that sketch and look where the origin is. And see that the trolley wheel was also not exactly located as at an origin when that assembly was created. We'll just drag this over here and create a horizontal vertical constraint between the origin and that line here. There it is. It still doesn't fully define the sketch because there's still elements that are in light purple, but I'll leave that for now. Then we're just going to simply go ahead with the activated component. Don't forget that. And revolve this thing and make another wheel out of it. And naturally, that sketch is still complaining about its lost reference, and that's okay. So we need to take that sketch and pull it after the revolve because it was created on a face of this revolved trolley wheel. So we're going to right click on this sketch, redefine the sketch plane, pick the face it was likely created on, and there's the sketch, and it doesn't complain anymore. Alright, so there was probably an extrusion there. And I'm just going to say to object, accept that. And instead of making that fillet afterwards, we're going to make it now. And no two separate ones, we just use one. 0.625 inches. And then we are going to make this thing. Well, that isn't really needed, so we need to do this again. Create a circular pattern, and instead of faces, we pick features, and I'm going to pick that cut and the fillet. Select the axis, and there we have our features. Alright, that's the trolley wheel. Right, that trolley wheel obviously doesn't sit where it was located previously, so in this case, that's the joint here that is out of location. So there was a joint origin somewhere located. I'm not going to fix that. I'm just going to delete this joint. So now you can join that trolley wheel where you want it. But hopefully this shows some techniques how you can fix a design that is in need of some reorganization and makes it much easier and logical to work with.